For months, astronomers treated 3I/Atlas as just another interstellar visitor, a curiosity passing through the solar system on its way to nowhere in particular. Telescopes beyond Neptune's orbit tracked a faint, fast-moving point of light and, using standard methods, estimated its size at around 2 kilometers across. The calculations seemed solid. Measure reflected light, estimate surface composition, run the numbers. Everything pointed to a small, dark, rocky body. No one suspected that the object wasn't merely reflecting sunlight. It was controlling how much of that light escaped. Only 3 days ago did NASA's Deep Space Imaging Array finally obtain high-resolution images sharp enough to map the surface, and what those images revealed rewrote every assumption. Instead of a rough, irregular asteroid, Atlas's surface was patterned with precise, hexagonal structures, each about 400 meters across, tiled over the entire body like engineered scales. These hexagons weren't just dark. They actively absorbed and suppressed incoming light, behaving like a massive stealth coating. When the brightness-based calculations were recalibrated using the actual resolved dimensions, the truth emerged. Atlas wasn't 2 kilometers wide. It was 47. That single correction exploded through every model. A 47-kilometer object is the size of a small moon, big enough to house entire cities inside it. Mass estimates jumped by a factor of 24, volume calculations ballooned, and suddenly the idea that this was just a natural rock wandering in from interstellar space collapsed. The precision and repetition of the hexagonal tiles, their perfect alignment and uniformity, screamed deliberate engineering rather than geology. One researcher described the shock of that first clear scan. They had expected craters and jagged formations, the typical scars of cosmic time. Instead, the surface looked like it had been designed to resemble a natural asteroid from afar, only revealing its true manufactured nature up close, like realizing the mountain you've been studying is actually a camouflaged building. If that were the only anomaly, it would already be the discovery of the century. But Atlas isn't just big and artificial. It's behaving in a way no natural object could. 6 weeks ago, its speed relative to the sun was measured at about 87 kilometers per second, a typical interstellar velocity. Then, something unprecedented happened. The object began to slow down, not gradually, under the pull of gravity, and not in a way that matched any gravitational interaction with planets or the sun. The deceleration was active. Spectroscopic observations from its trailing hemisphere showed thermal emissions that did not match reflected sunlight. They were consistent with internal energy sources, with heat being vented from the rear like the exhaust of immense braking thrusters. Atlas was firing engines, shedding speed, braking its own enormous mass from interstellar velocity down toward the orbital speeds typical of objects bound to the sun. As the weeks passed, its speed dropped to 31 kilometers per second and continues to decrease. Extrapolations show that, at its current rate of deceleration, Atlas will reach near-zero relative velocity with respect to Earth in about 14 days. In simple terms, a 47-kilometer, artificially constructed object is maneuvering so that in 2 weeks it will come to a stop relative to our planet. That alone would be enough to trigger panic behind closed doors, but the trajectory makes it even more unsettling. Atlas is not heading toward the sun, nor spiraling into a stable orbit around a gas giant. 3 weeks ago, it performed a deliberate course correction, another engine burn that shifted its path. The new trajectory runs directly toward Earth's orbital track. When the deceleration is complete, Atlas will settle at roughly 384,000 kilometers from Earth, the average distance of the Moon. It is effectively aiming to park itself in the neighborhood of our only natural satellite. Once the true size of Atlas was understood, NASA turned every available instrument toward it, probing its internal structure instead of just its surface. Radar and gravitational measurements shattered another assumption. Atlas is not a solid hunk of rock. Its interior is compartmentalized, carved into a network of vast chambers divided by structural supports. These aren't random voids like those in porous or fractured asteroids. They are geometric spaces, deliberately shaped, with clean boundaries and symmetrical layouts. The largest chamber, yet identified, spans about 12 kilometers across and extends 8 kilometers deep, large enough to engulf Manhattan with space to spare. At least 17 major chambers have been mapped, along with hundreds of smaller compartments. The load-bearing elements between them are arranged in patterns that appear engineered to handle stresses during acceleration and maneuvering, the way a skyscraper's internal framework distributes weight and forces. The mass of the entire object is around 8.7 trillion kilograms, enormous but significantly lighter than a solid body of its size should be. Density calculations indicate that roughly 40% of Atlas's volume is empty space. That wouldn't mean much by itself if not for the additional clues. Several of these internal chambers show elevated temperatures, regions of warmth inconsistent with simple solar heating. The patterns of heat suggest contained, localized sources, machinery, power systems, perhaps life support. On top of that, Atlas is emitting complex electromagnetic signals from within, not broadcast outward as attempts to contact us, but exchanged between different internal regions. The transmission patterns resemble an internal network, subsystems polling each other, synchronizing, running diagnostics. It looks less like a rock and more like a massive facility coming online. In the past week, another eerie detail emerged. 3 times, large clusters of the hexagonal surface tiles have opened briefly, venting gas into space before sealing again. Spectroscopic analysis of the released gas revealed a mixture of nitrogen, oxygen, and traces of carbon dioxide. Ratios not exactly identical to Earth's air, but close enough to be unmistakably similar. Whatever resides inside Atlas is storing or generating a breathable atmosphere, and occasionally purging or adjusting it. Gas vents, warm chambers, internal power systems. These all point to some kind of habitat, industrial complex, or vessel designed with living occupants or at least biological processes in mind. As Atlas has drawn closer, its surface has become increasingly dynamic. High-resolution images from the last 72 hours show the hexagonal plates reconfiguring in complex patterns. Some swivel to new orientations. Others retract entirely to reveal hidden machinery, sensor arrays, or structural frameworks beneath. The changes are anything but random. Thousands of tiles are rotating to point directly toward Earth, as if a vast array of instruments, each 400 meters wide, are aligning to focus on our planet. NASA estimates that more than 3,200 of these structures are now oriented at Earth, collectively covering an area larger than the city of Los Angeles, all seemingly dedicated to observing, scanning, or interacting with us. 18 hours ago, the most dramatic change yet took place. A region about 5 kilometers wide began to open, not as individual tiles, but as a unified aperture. The plates retracted in coordinated layers, revealing the beginnings of an enormous internal assembly. The structure exposed so far remains only partially visible, a framework wrapped around some central mechanism whose purpose is unknown. What is clear is its orientation. It faces Earth. Based on the rate at which the opening continues to widen, it will be fully deployed in around 11 days, just as Atlas reaches its intended station at lunar distance. Whatever this mechanism is, it requires a 5-kilometer hatch to operate and is being positioned with deliberate precision. Power measurements have tracked a parallel and increasingly alarming trend. 5 days ago, Atlas's total energy output surged by roughly 340% in less than 2 hours. Before the spike, its emissions suggested moderate internal systems, perhaps the equivalent of a large industrial facility. Afterward, the readings indicated sustained power generation on a scale comparable to a dense human metropolis. The emissions span a broad spectrum: thermal radiation from massive heat sources, radio and microwave noise, and organized magnetic fields of extraordinary strength. These fields are strong enough to detect from orbit, implying that inside Atlas the magnetic forces are far higher. Such fields are associated on Earth with fusion experiments, advanced propulsion concepts, and high-energy physics.